You know, it is one of those things where once you take stances that are unpopular, you become sort of unpopular in certain segments.
I have never been denied a single thing. The problem might just be you. Have you ever considered the problem is you and not trans people?
No.
Okay, well, I'm here to tell you the problem is you and not trans people.
This is what the left does to all minorities, which is try to instruct them how to think, try to instruct them what they need to believe in. Like, I don't care who you are, what you really believe, as long as you're voting in the direction of freedom. And that's all I care about.
I think that you and I definitely agree on a lot of this. For me, I'd rather have a conversation sort of about the logic behind your stance. I feel like I'm always damage controlling for the trans community, which is so frustrating.
So I'm a YouTuber, and I'm definitely more so known for being the queen of controversy. That's kind of what people call me. I have a lot of takes on my channel that maybe other people in my community don't typically have, which is fine, or at least it should be. You tend to get blackballed a little bit when you do, black sheeped a little bit when you do. Real life is definitely kinder, but online, just search my name up and the word trans, and you'll see a lot of crazy comments about me. Trans sports, that's probably the one I've taken the most heat for, is feeling as though it isn't fair for trans women to compete in sports with biological women, at least in the overwhelming majority of cases.
I'm quite disappointed for the female athlete who will lose out on that spot. We're all about equality for women in sport, but right now that equality's been taken away from us. Weightlifters come up to me and say, like, what do we do? Like, this isn't fair, what can we do? And unfortunately, there's nothing we can do, because every time we try to voice it, we get told to be quiet.
The strength
trying
tip,
to go for
trying
the
to
double.
go up, does pretty well, gets her on the ground. Now as you can see how her ground game goes.
Alana McLaughlin.
Even people who don't care about sports, you mention trans in sports, suddenly everyone has an opinion. And so do I, but it seems as if sometimes there's only one set of opinions that can be held, especially in my community. I was just a college student trying to go to school for computer science. I decided one day, after being fed up on my college campus of just inherently knowing that I couldn't share my beliefs with my peers or my professors without being ostracized, I said, let me take to the internet, let me make a YouTube video. I think I expected about 7 people to watch it, 5 being my family members. Woke up the next day, the video was going viral, and my life has changed dramatically ever since, and now I'm here. My first video was about feminism, which is funny because feminism used to be kind of like the centerpiece of online political discourse, and now it's a little less of a hot topic, but back then that was the topic to talk about if you wanted to get canceled. So I transitioned at 20. It was the best decision of my life. I would never take it back. It opened up so many opportunities in my life. Obviously, it was right for me as a person. My earliest memories in life, probably 4 or 5 years old, was feeling gender dysphoria. So it was a feeling that escalated throughout my entire life, and I fixed it. I think that sometimes as YouTubers, commentators, whatever you want to call it, we can maybe feel as though we're very much hated outside of our supporters, obviously, because online it's a lot of hate. But in reality, if I go to an LGBT bar, an LGBT part of town, I can't really walk more than 5 feet without people saying that they're thankful for my content, they've been inspired by it, they can't publicly agree with me, but they'll let me know on the side. Being trans is not an ideology, it's not a belief system, it's just an aspect of who I am. Not whole of who I am, an aspect of who I am. And so the idea that I have to hold certain political opinions, certain beliefs, just based on that factor, which really shouldn't matter, I've never understood that. I'm a trans woman, period, point blank. I have no problem with that. I don't need to try to validate myself by running around saying that I am a biological female and that is my life, because that's not my life, that's not my experience. I think that biological women and trans women have very different experiences. There are obviously some similarities, some connections, some things you could absolutely relate to, but there's a lot you can't. So the idea to blindly conflate the two when having scientific discussions is also a problem. So you have a lot of trans people going to hospitals and not disclosing that they're trans, and then they're getting the wrong treatment for certain things. That's just a reality, and it absolutely shouldn't be something that's controversial to say. Biological sex is not changeable. You can obviously live your life your way that you want. I'm an example of that. Gender dysphoria up until I think just a couple years ago was always listed as a mental disorder. And for me, I'm all about destigmatizing mental health issues. I don't feel the need to bury the fact that it's clearly some sort of neurological condition that caused me to feel this way. I think if you're feeling these feelings at 4 years old, it's something there. And so to me, it makes all the sense in the world to say gender dysphoria is a mental disorder, a mental health issue, and it should be treated as such, and people should work their way out of it in the way that they see fit. Search up the word detransition on YouTube. It's a growing number of young people who are facing this issue, who transition, end up regretting it. There's a very common narrative that they feel sucked into online discourse that maybe validates something in them that might not be so valid, which is those feelings of being trans. Obviously, detransitioners don't make up the entire trans community. There's plenty of people who transition and are happy about it. But the idea that we can only talk about the ones on the happy end of the spectrum, especially when there's kids doing it, I think is an issue. So I've made a point to interview a lot of them on my channel, and they're some of my most watched videos, some of the ones people find the most compelling, because you'll have a 16-year-old girl who removed her breasts, underwent testosterone, has a permanently deep voice because of it. And it's tragic, and they're definitely censored themselves. They're not allowed to tell their stories. They face a ton of backlash within the community, and that definitely needs to change. I think that a more general and all-encompassing discussion on this topic, especially because it's so complex, is what we need, not censorship of one side or the other. I think that there is a phenomenon that happens sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, with parents of trans kids, that it becomes their identity to an extent, that them being the parent of a trans child is suddenly, you see it in a lot of them, they have online personas because of it. That can lead to maybe an unhealthy attachment towards their kid being trans, and if that feeling happens to change, the parents might not be as willing to allow it to change. There was a documentary called Transhood, I believe, on HBO recently. And there was a boy who, from the age of, I think, 5 or 6, wanted to wear dresses like the color pink. By the time he turns 10, he said, actually, Mom and Dad, I'm a boy, I don't want to be a girl. And the mother would not let it go. The mother actually went into a depression because the child wasn't trans. So as opposed to just supporting your child on their journey they're on regardless, it can't become their own journey. And that happens sometimes. I think there's a certain inclination to only talk about the success stories of trans people, that once you transition, your life is set and you're happy and everything's great, when in reality, for me, transitioning was the jump off. It was like, I'm gonna get this over with, and then I'm gonna move on to building a career, having a family, building a real life. There's life after transition, and that's never discussed really. Permanently altering your body is much more of an adult decision. I get hundreds of emails a day, and as long as I'm getting hundreds of emails from people saying that they made a mistake, that they regret it, that all of that, I'm probably gonna be more inclined to believe it should be done as an adult, or at least in the very late teen years at the very minimum. But you have 12-year-olds going on puberty blockers. They tend to not develop in a way that is needed to have an actual sex change. Jazz Jennings is an example. She has a reality show. She's a young trans girl, and there's nothing against her. I think she's a great person, and I think she's cool. But because of her going on medication so young, they couldn't even give her the sex change she wanted all her life because she didn't develop to the point where that was possible.
They took me to the doctor when I was 3 years old, and she held up 2 dolls. One doll was a girl and had girl parts, and one doll was a boy and had boy parts. And she said, which do you have right now? And I pointed to the boy doll. And then she said, which do you want? And I pointed to the girl doll.
I would say that I have a girl brain and a boy body, and I think like a girl, but I just have a boy body. And
we have to have conversations about all of it, not just half of it. There's a lot of, my pronouns are doll, vampire. It's really a costume for a lot of people.
What are neopronouns? They're basically your own custom pronouns. When no other pronouns seem to fit, you come up with your own pronouns. Anything can really be a pronoun.
I just came up with new neopronouns that combine he, him, she, her, and they, them. We have them so they've combined he and she as well. Everybody gets you with thee, them, theirs today.
I just added bug to my list of pronouns. Bug wanted to go to the store by Bug's self.
But the unfortunate thing is that sort of the 87 gender crowd is often conflated with being a transsexual, which is what I am. I don't relate to that crowd. I don't find similarities in our narrative, in our life story. But when I meet other transsexuals, there's obviously things I can compare it with. With that crowd, not so much. I think that, like all trends, it will eventually die out. I think that in many ways, it's like the new emo. It's the new attention seeking. You know, everyone has it in their profile, even if they don't really need to. Like, you have just a straight up like biological man or woman who looks like a biological man or woman and they want to put it in their description. I think that a lot of people come at it from a good place, but it is really interesting to see, being trans myself, that like it's kind of a show for a lot of people, is kind of virtue signaling that these are my pronouns, these are my pronouns. Being trans isn't a trend for actual trans people. It's like, this is something that is, like I said, a reality for me since I was a very young child, and it never went away. So the idea that it's reduced to virtue signaling and show ponying, and it's frustrating for sure. And I talked to a lot of other trans people who are extremely frustrated with it. I've never talked to an actual real trans person who was even remotely okay with it. It's just more so of a thing you pretend to be okay with to keep your reputation in the community. It would be a luxury if the only issue I could base my voting on, my passions on, were trans issues. There's so much more going on in the world I care about. The idea that I shouldn't be voting based on how I feel about foreign policy, immigration, the border, COVID, like, those are all things I care infinitely more about, and those are the things that are gonna shape how I live my life and my choices. I think it goes back to treating it as an ideology, treating trans as an ideology, but it's really just a group of people, and you see this with all minorities. You see people that are Black told they have to vote a certain way. Look at the Larry Elder incident. You had a white woman in a gorilla mask assaulting him, and somehow that white woman isn't racist because she's liberal. So oddly enough, I think it was my transition that pushed me towards being on the right. I'm a Republican. I think that people maybe have a misconception that because I'm trans, that there was once upon a time where I was a Democrat, voting Democrat, never voted for a Democrat in my life. You know, I'm a Republican. Am I gonna sit here and say that I am a Christian conservative who holds all of those beliefs? Absolutely not. But the Republican Party as it stands now is probably the most closely aligned with my beliefs. No one can sit here and say that the right has been amazing to trans people or amazing on trans issues. That would be a bit of a delusion. However, I think that a lot of people get very mad that I exist in that realm, in the right-wing world, and that I do videos for the Daily Wire, and that I'm open about my views. But wouldn't you rather have someone like me have a seat at the table and be able to be part of the conversation rather than secluding ourselves to one side? I garnered a sense of independence, self-reliance, self-growth that is definitely more of a staple on that end. So I think that it only made sense, you know, if I'm gonna take responsibility and change my life and shape it in the way I want, then that's gonna be that.